Welcome to the Aspen Institute. Today we have an opportunity for a conversation with Julia Stasch, who's president of the MacArthur Foundation, as you all know, and it's based in Chicago, but it's got offices in New Delhi, it's got offices in Abuja, in Nigeria, and in Mexico City. I think we've got Julia's bio, but what's interesting to me about her background is that she has held leadership positions in the public sector on both the city level and the national level, in the private sector, and in the charitable sector. And I guess my sense is it's at the intersection of those three sectors that the problems get solved. And so that deep understanding and leadership role. One of those was heading up is it Shorebank Chicago companies? And I'm sorry, what
No.
am I saying wrong? Do I have it right?
You have it exactly right.
Oh, wow, that's a rare moment. And the first community development bank was Shorebank in Chicago. So she has already, even in that role, leveraged the activities of one or the methods of one sector and applied them to another, to the world of social change. So welcome, Julia Stasch. It's great
Thanks
to
so
have
much.
you
I'm
here.
really pleased to be here. Look forward to talking.
Okay, great. I think that my understanding is that MacArthur is right now looking at the question of how to go about strengthening democracy here in the U.S. as well as elsewhere. Tell us, what is the problem you're trying to solve, and have you settled on some of the methods for addressing that problem?
Well, I'm not sure that everyone thinks that democracy needs strengthening, but I think it is a thread in many, many conversations, and people have a heightened sense that perhaps the norms and the institutions and the practices that have sort of upheld not only governing, but interaction amongst individuals, and it's also the underpinning of an ideal, that those are really at risk right now. And so I think now is a time when it's really easy to say, oh my God, what happened today? What should we do? What happened yesterday? What should we do? And what I think is that each of us who have leadership roles in institutional philanthropy particularly would be better if what we did is to make a sober assessment of really what is the range of the issues, the institutions that are at risk, the practices, the comity, all those things that have underpinned both how we think about America and what we hope America is at its most idealistic best. And so there's many things that we can work on. We can work on money in politics. We can work on gerrymandering. We can work on problem solving. We can work on the census, and I want to talk a little bit about that in a little while because that's an issue of democracy of the moment. But amongst all the things that are on the table for philanthropic attention, we have selected an independent journalism, an independent media ecosystem as the thing that we think is essential, that it be strengthened and nurtured and supported, that it actually be expanded so that more voices are have a way to get through to the debate, that journalists are protected. We think that this is essential not only to, I don't mean not only to everything that is important in a democracy. It actually it sends a signal that people's stories are important to get into the debate. So we've selected journalism. Others select many other aspects, and I think, I hope that the aggregate of all the attention to the strength of our democracy is enough for what it takes.
What's interesting about journalism, of course, that it's stressed in two ways. I mean, the business model has fallen away. It's been challenged, but also there are those who seek to discredit the media, and so it seems like there's sort of two fronts on which to work.
I think there's even a third front, which is not just about discrediting the media; it's about manipulating the media. When I think about how each of us who probably thinks of ourselves as savvy consumers of news maybe have lost a tiny bit of confidence that what we read is coming from a source, a reliable source that is that believes in facts and believes in a groundedness that what is coming across your phone, which now is hard to differentiate, is it something I asked for or is it something that someone has picked for me to see? So I think there's a third very troubling trend in journalism.
Oh, that's a really great point, and it makes me think of a larger sort of underlying problem, and that is the decline in trust. Americans are reporting that majorities don't trust the institutions of governance, but that they also don't trust each other, which is perhaps more alarming. To what extent is it the role of foundations to counter that trend, to build social capital?
So the decline in trust in institutions is actually not a new phenomenon. It has been building over several decades, and it is manifest now not just in a lack of trust in the institutions of government. It's lack of trust in traditional media. It's lack of trust in church hierarchy. It's lack of trust in even philanthropy itself. I don't know the degree that that is manifest yet, but I think that philanthropy is not immune from a decline in trust. I mean, we have historically been seen as an elite organization in a privileged situation, and so I think philanthropy, before it actually solves the trust challenge, it actually has to say to itself, what are we doing to engender and nurture trust in us? And so I wrote an essay last year about this very issue. And I challenged us and perhaps others to say, what can we do to make sure that philanthropy does not follow in the trend of decline? And some of the things I said is philanthropy needs to challenge itself to be more open and more transparent. How does it make decisions? What are the returns on its endowment? What are the practices? Who do they invite to be, investment managers? Who speaks for the foundation? A whole array of, individual challenges that would add up to a foundation saying transparency is our default position. We also need to say to ourselves, are we as nimble? Are we as open? Are we as innovative in how we deploy our money? Are we listening enough? I think foundations have often been criticized for being sort of insular and saying, well, the smartest people in the room actually work here. So we will decide what the issues are that we want to work on, and we'll decide what we want to do, and then we'll recruit nonprofit organizations to execute on our ambitions. Are we listening enough? Are we open enough? Are we innovative enough? Are we close enough to the ground? At the same time, are we willing to connect the assets, the knowledge assets, the human capital assets that we have in our broad networks? Are we willing to connect those to people who work on the ground?
So you've as you talk about sort of starting with a strategy, and then moving to find who can execute on that strategy, how would that intersect with the foundation's willingness to place a few big bets? I'm thinking about climate change. I'm thinking about criminal justice reform. Selecting an issue that requires a multi-pronged response and requires you're staying with it for a while. So. First, how would you define big bets, and how are you thinking about it in those two instances or others?
So when I assumed when I got in the big chair at MacArthur, the board challenged us as an institution to say, are we actually achieving through our grants and our partnerships, are we achieving enough impact for the moment, for the times? And so the answer to that is, at that time, was probably not enough. Because as I looked across the full array of programs that we were funding, 13, 14, 15, 18 programs, when you divide 18 into 250 or $300 million, it's not actually that much per issue. And so the board said, narrow the number of things that you are doing for greater impact. Make sure that they are profound, meaning issues at this time, even if you stay with them for a long time, are perhaps intractable but need to be wrestled to the ground. And so they said, let's work on big ideas. The fact is that I think they thought that they came up with that phrase, big ideas, but I had to break it to them that actually it has become trite and jargon within philanthropy. But the fact is, they said, work on big ideas. And so looking ahead to the fact that we would be narrowing the number of programs, focusing on what we called big bets, I invited anyone in the foundation to meet me in the large room and say, let's work together and say, what is a big bet? Because I wanted to enroll people in this culture change. I wanted them to endorse and embrace and be excited about fewer things, deeper investment, higher bar. And so we actually came up with the questions that we would ask when we were thinking about what is a big bet. First of all, is it profound? Is it audacious? And then the question that I think we ask too infrequently in philanthropy, which is, what does it take? I think too often in a foundation, we will say, what is the problem? And then we go immediately to, what will we do? And so we lose the sense of what is the contribution of what we will do to what it will take. So, is it profound? Is it audacious? What will it take? Why now? Why is this moment in time important? Are conditions converging? Are opportunities emerging? Is leadership evident? Is investment by others coming to the fore? And then we say, what will MacArthur do? What will we invest in? Challenging ourselves to say, is what we're investing in significant? Is it targeted to what it takes? And will it make a substantial contribution to what it takes? And then we say, why is it feasible? We have to answer that question. It's not, is there evidence for every single aspect, but why is it feasible that what we will do will actually make that kind of contribution to what it will take? And then a really important new question that I think that we in philanthropy fail to answer routinely, and that is, what do we not know? And so maybe we do that instinctively, but we now do it rigorously. We say, what do we not know? And what are we assuming is true as an underpinning of what we've decided to do? And once we think we've identified what we don't know and what we assume to be true, we track that over time to see if actually what we assume to be true bears out and supports what we've decided to do or not, which says you better challenge your assumptions and perhaps change what you're doing. So that's how we think about a big bet.
Yeah. Well, what's in the two big bets that I mentioned, the climate change and criminal justice reform, we're in a situation where national policy is not sympathetic, or it's a difficult time in Washington to address either problem. So, where are the innovations? What are the pressure points? Where can you make a difference when you have this pretty big change in sentiment in the national government, the federal government?
So let me step back just a tiny bit and say what our big bets are. So when we decided that we would skinny back the number of things we were working on, we said, how will we decide what it is we will work on? And so MacArthur's mission is a world that is more just, verdant, and peaceful. And so what are critical issues that fall within those broad areas that meet all of the sort of criteria for how we think about a big bet? So in the context of just, we're working on the U.S. criminal justice system, justice reform, and we're also supporting Nigerian-led efforts to reduce corruption in Nigeria. Working on climate change, in the context of verdant. And then working on peaceful reducing nuclear risk. So those are the big bets, and they are underpinned by two what we call enduring commitments. An enduring commitment to the role of journalism and to our hometown, Chicago. I mean, we are rooted in Chicago. It's a terrific place to be a civic leader. I'm not sure I should say what I'm about to say, but it's a place where every problem in the country manifests, and so you actually can work on things in Chicago that have implications and lessons across the country. I think that's probably true of any big city, but Chicago is where we are. And so in those contexts, the big bets that we have chosen, the ones that are grounded in the U.S., even if they're global in nature, they just turned out to be in the line of sight right now from a political and policy perspective. The criminal justice system, where the federal government has stepped back from bipartisan leadership on the issue. Climate change, where the federal government has said, I don't know if they actually said this, but I read it somewhere and I loved it so much, the phrase, carbon dioxide is not a problem, it's the gas of life. And so I looked that up, and actually that's true, but it sounded to me like such a climate denier sort of argument. And then nuclear risk, where every day we wake up and say, is there a new back and forth between the leaders of Korea and our leaders that are amping up the potential for interaction that will be devastating for this country and for the world. So the fact is that those big bets, also with journalism, we ended up with issues which are in the center of the sort of roiling political and policy moment that we're in. So, for example, on the criminal justice reform, you say, well, what are you doing without leadership at the federal level, with a Justice Department that has turned its back on local police reform, its role in local police reform, and is no longer supporting bipartisan sentencing reform and things like that? We had selected as the entry point into criminal justice reform and the reduction of incarceration, not at the state level, not at the federal level, but at the local level, where more people who interact with the justice system experience that. I mean, so our focus is on changing the way this country thinks about and uses jails. There's a devastating overuse and misuse of jails. When you think about 11 million jail admissions a year, I mean, that's many times how many new entrants into prison each year. That was something that we had to absorb when we finally realized that most people think that jail and prison is the same thing. As a matter of fact, they're not. And so jail is where most of the people are there before they've been adjudicated, and they are in a presumed innocent state. So the wonderful thing about having selected that as an entry point is that with the withdrawal of the federal support, we have serendipitously confirmed that the political will continues at the local level, that county executives and sheriffs and judges and others say how our justice system, in so many places across the country, say how our justice system is functioning. It needs to be fairer, and we're going to continue to work on it no matter what the signals are from the federal government.
And of course, you've got efforts among prosecutors, local prosecutors, to influence what charge they're going to go for. I'm struck by the fact that in many of those issue areas, you need an infrastructure of civil society organizations, whether or not the moment is opportune. So, for example, on arms control, I think a lot of people thought when the Clinton administration came in, it was so pro-arms control, didn't need to fund those organizations anymore. And number one, no administration is ever completely pure on a given issue, but also that infrastructure is needed for when the time comes. So I think of you as making long-term commitments like that. Is that a fair assessment of your approach?
So we have many areas of work where we've made long-term commitments, but an imperative of a big bet is that there is a time frame to the big bet. A time frame for me is very important because there has to be something that calls the question at a moment in time that says, is the outcome actually being achieved? And it says that if it's not being achieved, for us now, the right answer isn't, well, if it's not being achieved, let's just do something else. No. If it's not being achieved, we have to say, is there a better use for that dollar? And so that's a different thing that says we're going to work on conservation forever, no matter where the moment takes us or the forces converge or anything like that. But to your point about, is it really important that there are organizations that are strong, that are able to respond to any moment? Absolutely. And that's why in our climate area, where, of course, we've seen a complete withdrawal of the federal leadership that we had experienced that culminated in the Paris Accords and a lot of energy around the U.S. as a leader. The fact is that a great number of our grantees in our climate program receive general operating support. General operating support doesn't say work on this project plus 15 or 20% contribution to your overhead. It's here is $9 million over 3 years or something like that. I have confidence in you that you are influential, nimble, connected, and will be at the table and be able to respond or proffer information or policy positions that are appropriate to the moment, a moment that we may not be able to intuit at the time that we make the grant. We also think that general operating support is not just important in a strategy like what we call climate solutions. This general operating support is critical even at the local level when you're working in a place like Chicago. So that's why we provide general operating support to about 300 arts and culture organizations in the greater Chicago area, not because we love the performance, but because of what arts and culture is to the to human potential, what it is to identity, what it is to community, and so general operating support is really important there. On another aspect in Chicago, where there are many, many organizations outside of the arts and culture realm, we decided we would not do general operating support because there's too many organizations that if you withdrew support after a few years, we would be falling right into the trap of foundations are fickle, which is a criticism over time. So we decided that instead of general operating support for other organizations, we would do something that we would provide support that is hard to get in philanthropy, and that is what's called institutional support. And so institutional support is different from general operating support. Institutional support is when an organization is doing strategic planning or needs investment in its technology or wants to build a bench for succession or wants to create a new program or reach out to new partners and new collaborations. So instead of general operating support, we give 2 to 4 years of institutional support up to $1 million over that period of time to say what's it going to take to strengthen that organization so it can do just what you're saying.
So what I have always found interesting about you and your approach at various stages of your career is that you're both steady and inventive. It was true when you were when you worked for the mayor. It was true at Shorebank. It's been true in MacArthur. So I wanted to pivot for a moment and look at the innovations in philanthropy that have been so much a part of MacArthur. Now, one predates you, and that's the MacArthur Fellowship, but 100 and change, and impact investing. But you've kind of ratcheted up all three of them. So talk a little bit first about the fellowship, what a lot of people call the Genius Awards.
We don't call it that, but we have no control. So we don't call it fake news either, but we. But the fact is that the MacArthur Fellows are a defining part of our identity. And they are the primary way that we support individuals as opposed to organizations. And so the evergreen, consistent, will not waver from our commitment to the Fellows Program is our commitment and our respect for individual creativity. And that's why individual creativity, a record of accomplishment, but even more important, the potential for continued growth and development of that individual creativity underlies the MacArthur Fellows. And I love the phrase that Cecilia Conrad, who leads the MacArthur Fellows and the 100 and Change program, she described in talking about the latest class of fellows, she said, these are people on the precipice. And so people on the precipice of even more contribution, even more creativity, that's what's so inspiring about it. Now, we're often asked, how can somebody be on the precipice if they're 63 years old? So we rebuff that question. We say that creativity can continue to bloom at any age. And that's why fellows have ranged up into their 70s and, of course, start down in their 20s. And so the beauty of the broad range of age, but also the incredible diversity of fields and endeavors, it is not only an acknowledgement of those individual accomplishments and potential, it fulfills another goal, and that is, can the MacArthur Fellows Program be an inspiration? Can it actually be an inspiration to others to say, look inside yourself. What are the roots of your own creativity? I mean, when someone says, I see that that person who is a MacArthur Fellow went to a community college. I go to a community college. Why isn't that kind of experience just as good as other experiences? So for me, the inspiration quotient is just as important as the acknowledgement of the individuals.
Do you have any? I think you just announced them. Is there any you want to point to for us to picture a MacArthur Fellow? Or are there just too many good ones?
Well, there's more than 900 now, so there's way too many good ones. But I think in this recent class, we were very pleased to support the efforts of a young woman who is an undocumented immigrant herself, a leader of a nationwide organization focused on the prospects for dreamers. That's at the young end. At the older end, I guess at the older trend, I don't know, I don't want to say end, but we have a wonderful photographer from Chicago who is documenting everyday life in a way that resonates with individuals. And so you have the full range of people experiences, and it's not really good to pick ones because, that's like, I really love all my children, but the fact is that there's something to inspire in each and every one of them.
So your first example reminds me that a lot of the fellows are immigrants. What does that? I realize that wasn't particularly purposeful to make a statement, but what does that tell us about how change happens?
So recently there was a New York Times column about immigrants and contribution to American life. And some of the statistics and anecdotes came from our own research on the full body of 900 plus fellows. And the fact is that there are more immigrants in that group than are, representative in the general population. And so the thing that I think undergirds that is that creativity is often the, sort of the expression of people who are striving. And striving is a characteristic that so many people ascribe to immigrants. Just people who have left their home, who've moved to a new place, who have come to a place where they know no one. They put down roots. They figure out, I love this country that I have worked so hard to come to. How can I give to it? What's the maximum expression of my own identity? So that's why it doesn't surprise me that there are many, many immigrants in the population of MacArthur Fellows.
So, an innovation of yours is 100 and Change. So, tell us what that program is and what it has produced.
So 100 and change is actually the consequence of a realization that as we narrowed the number of things we were working on and we increased the strategic nature of them in search of specific outcomes and metrics of progress toward those outcomes, I realized that maybe we were giving up something that philanthropy perhaps, perhaps distinctively in our society has, which is the ability to do pretty much anything it wants to do. And so that everything doesn't have to be focused on a specific outcome. One of the things that was behind the idea of 100 and change was that also an attribute that would contribute to greater trust in philanthropy is increased humility. And so humility could be expressed in not just funding the things that we thought were important, but being supportive of the ambitions of others. So the MacArthur Fellows Program is an example of that. But 100 and change is an example of our desire to say, hey, maybe we are not the smartest people in the room. And maybe there's a lot of good ideas and programs and projects out there that our usual, although wide, network might not unearth. And so shouldn't we say, tell us what are good ideas, tell us what are solutions to problems anywhere in the world that we could learn about and perhaps be supportive of. So the idea there of 100 and change was that MacArthur would award a $100 million grant every 3 years to a single proposal. Now, there are lots of $100 million grants out there. Very few of them are for sort of social change. Many of them are institutional grants for buildings and museums and other wonderful expressions of civic life. But 100 and change was meant to try to wrestle to the ground a profound problem anywhere in the world that others would let us know about. And so one of the hardest things in all the webinars that we held with potential applicants was convincing them that we were really open to any kind of proposals. And as a matter of fact, Cecilia Conrad tells the story about she's in conversation on a webinar and she says, we are inviting proposals on any topic from anywhere in the world. And a minute or two later, somebody will say, well, will you accept proposals on food security? Yes. And a minute later, well, will you accept proposals on community revitalization? Yes. So it was so sort of not in the culture of philanthropy to be 100% open. And so 100 and change, we struggled, we were worried, we hoped we would get 50 good proposals. Well, we got 1,904 proposals. And so we had recruited a few judges, external judges, and we frantically just upped that ante so that we had more than 400 judges. So we skinnied that 1,900 down to about 800 and then sent those 800 proposals out to judges. So each proposal would be reviewed and ranked by 5 independent judges. As part of the openness, we said every applicant would receive the judges' comments so that they could see what wise heads across a variety of disciplines had to say about their proposals. So in a very, very tough exercise, our board skinnied that down to semifinalists, and then at our last board meeting, we narrowed that down to 4 finalists. And if you are really eager to learn who they are, outside is a little flyer that actually describes the semifinalists. And the wonderful serendipitous outcome of the entire process, we didn't anticipate when we designed it, was the degree of interest from other funders. The high net worth individuals or networks or other foundations sending us a note saying, send me all your proposals about housing and homelessness, or send me all your proposals about Cleveland, or just send me all your proposals about, the second version of the Green Revolution in Africa. Just the sort of, once again, the inspirational quotient that here was a body of proposals ranging from a few really goofy ones to lots of great ideas. And there may have never been before this sort of public asset. And so that's how we're viewing 100 and change. At the end, we want our award just be a tiny piece of support that many of these proposals can garner over time.
As we were chatting earlier, you noted how much wealth there is, how many philanthropic dollars there are out there from individuals who may not have a staff and may not have 800 judges or 400 judges, whatever it was. Are they your target audience for sharing the proposals by and large?
Well, I think that one of the things we have to grapple with is the incredibly robust increase in wealth in this country. My next comments are not about disparities, which are inequalities and inequities in wealth, but this is just about the incredible opportunity, I think, that has emerged with the increasing wealth in this country. And so we were talking a little bit earlier about high net worth individuals, and apparently I've read recently that you look across these individuals and actually their giving every year is about $40 billion. And so that is many X times the total of the top 25 institutional funders in this country. And so sort of just musing about that as if which is really just a tiny 1% of their wealth, if that could be increased by just doubling it, that would put another $40 billion into the marketplace of solutions and support. So I think that what we need here in philanthropy, and I'm using the word philanthropy more very broadly here, we need multiple vehicles to tap into, to harness, and to unlock this wealth, which then can be used for not only the civic impulses of the individuals, but for social change. And so if over time 100 and change can become more of a public asset and a vehicle for channeling more dollars into social change and solutions, that would be terrific. But multiple vehicles are needed.
Well, so MacArthur, of course, is one of the original pioneers in impact investing. A lot of these folks, these high net worth individuals, they come out of the private sector. They love harnessing the private sector to social outcomes. Talk a little bit about MacArthur's approach to that, and then pretty soon we'll turn to the audience.
So just a quick couple of comments about impact investing. MacArthur has actually been doing impact investing since 1986. And so this is putting financing tools, guarantees, loans, credit enhancement, other kinds of financial tools to work for organizations for whom this kind of support is helpful. And so the idea here is, can impact investing be at the same time a global phenomenon where folks are looking to find out if there are projects in Africa that can receive deep investment and yield a market rate return? At the same time that happens, can there be investments that are important to a neighborhood in Chicago? And so, responding to the second, we and two collaborators created what is called Benefit Chicago. It's a $100 million fund that is meant to plow that amount of money into neighborhoods and local social enterprises and businesses that need it the most. But the beauty of it is, can we also tap into individuals that love Chicago, that want Chicago to succeed, but are not going to be making an impact investment on their own? How do you channel their money into those neighborhoods and those organizations and businesses? And so, working with the Chicago Community Trust and the Calvert Foundation, we created Benefit Chicago, and the mechanism is what's called a Calvert note, a community investment note. It's a conventional fixed income instrument that an individual who wants to put $20 toward making a neighborhood a better place, all the way up to $1 million or $5 million or $10 million. They can buy a note. It can be a maturity, a year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and it yields, it yields 1% to 4%, depending on the maturity. So ease of investment through the purchase of a note, and then through a special purpose fund that MacArthur has created and invested $50 million of our own money. We then, through this entity, make the long-term, 10-year, lower interest rate, custom, flexible kinds of loans and investments that the organizations that are working on the ground need. So impact investing now, I think, is all about making it easier for people who want to express either love for a place or desire for solutions, making it easier for them to put their money to work through organizations that know how to do it and will take risk on their own.
Thank you. As I look out on the audience, I keep seeing people I've known over the years who are experts in many of the topics we've covered.
Oh, no.
And many of the issue areas that MacArthur has selected. So why don't we open it up for Q&A? Do we have microphones so there are microphones on both sides. So come on down here. And pick for the second one, someone over here, Rachel. But we'll start.
Thanks very much. Stephen Balcom with the Family Online Safety Institute. Highly laud your work with journalism and a way to counter fake news. What about at the receiving end on that phone? And is MacArthur still interested in media literacy? In other words, how to discern what is the good stuff that's coming through and figure out what is really fake? We think of media literacy as an antidote to fake news. Just interested in your thoughts on that.
I think we have a renewed and increasing interest in that because we need to be, everybody needs to be an educated consumer of news and able to discern what's real and what's not and what to put stock in. And so I think you'll see an increasing investment in our portfolio in just that.
Hi, Scott Beal from Atlas Corp. Kudos to the 100 and Change campaign. That was it was a fantastic application and great process, and I'm glad to see it was so far seems so successful. I'm really interested in the note that you were just talking about for impact investing in Chicago. I just know so many organizations that have trouble accessing that capital, and even individual investors want to be a part of on the other side. So I had not heard about this. That's amazing. Is that available outside of Chicago? Is Calvert doing it here in DC, or is this still in the early stages?
Actually, Calvert has been doing this for 20 years. And as a matter of fact, if you go online to purchase a note directly online, also available through brokerage accounts and others like that, but you go online and you purchase a Calvert note, but you have to indicate that dedicate this one to Chicago. So their notes are actually available more broadly. And there are some other targeted geographies. So I encourage you to really reach out to Calvert Foundation and find out if it can be useful in other places as well.
That's one example you have, but you also have supported the Housing Partnership Equity Trust. Is that focused on Chicago as well?
No, the Housing Partnership Equity Trust is a national, first of its kind real estate investment trust for affordable housing. And our investment in that enabled the participating organizations, nonprofit housing owners and developers, to actually tap into many millions of additional dollars based on the first loss position that MacArthur would take. And that is another way that impact investments can use, which is, I hate this term, but de-risking a larger transaction that would include conventional investors in its stack.
Thank you. How about this side of the room? You don't want that side to get give the impression of being more assertive. Here we are. And then right behind you, next.
Okay, great, thank you. Susan Desjardins, Capital Keys, but I have also worked in nonprofits and been involved with the Children's Defense Fund, Leukemia Society, and the Washington Area Women's Foundation. And I wanted to thank you because I think listening to you is as inspiring as your grants. And I wondered, you bring such a background in government service and the local level, and then banking, and then nonprofit. And I wonder, you personally, what do you think has been the best preparatory skill that you had to bring to your current position?
That's a terrific question, and I think back to when I was younger, and I lamented the fact that I did not have a life plan, and so I felt a lot of pressure. Why didn't I want to be a lawyer? Why didn't I want to be a doctor? Why didn't I want to be something else? And when I look back now, I think, thank God I didn't want to be one of those things, because it would have robbed me of the diversity of experiences. And so whenever someone asks me, what should I do in my career? I say, have a stint in every single sector. Have a stint in government. Have a stint in the nonprofit or the advocacy realm, because that stood me in good stead when I was in government, when we would be besieged by advocates demanding an extremely extreme position on something, and my fellow government workers would say, how could they say that? And I say, they have to say that, or they get nothing. And the fact is, government isn't really in the business of nothing. Government is in the business of helping to find that sweet spot. And so folks on the outside have to ask for more than they ultimately will be willing to accept. So having the benefit of every single sector, corporate, nonprofit, philanthropic, everything, gives me a sense of, I think, and this is not unique to me, obviously, but gives me a sense of what's a good place to end up with anybody with whom you're trying to partner or negotiate. And so that, I think, has helped me enormously.
And yes, sir.
Richard America at Georgetown. A personal footnote, about 30 years ago, I was a finalist for the job of Economic Development Director for the city of Chicago when Harold Washington was mayor. He died of a heart attack, tragically. If I'd gotten a job, you wouldn't have any problems today in Chicago. How's that?
That's actually what I've heard. So
That was a joke.
So
Two questions. Unsolicited proposals over the transom. Do they have a shot? Is it worth the time and effort to send an idea to the foundation, and what are the odds? And particularly with respect to historically black colleges, which are struggling and I've been working on, and business schools in Africa, management education in Africa.
So we had a long-standing program, higher education in Africa, with other partners as well. We've narrowed our focus in Africa right now to anti-corruption efforts led by Nigerians. So the African higher education is not an area where we would accept a proposal right now. General unsolicited proposals, right now our only avenue for the unsolicited proposal, the primary avenue for the unsolicited proposal is 100 and change and its next various iterations. That doesn't mean that there isn't room for unsolicited proposals in the context of climate, criminal justice reform, journalism, the big bets and the enduring commitments. But I'm in a moment right now in foundation leadership where, having skinnied back the number of proposals, I feel for now the pendulum has swung over there for discipline. And so I feel that before we loosen it up a little bit, we have to stay in that cultural place where discipline and focus, not 100 and change, but where discipline and focus drive us. So I would say that right now, the likelihood of a completely out of the blue, unsolicited proposal catching the interest of us and us saying, even though it doesn't match any of our priorities, it's so compelling, I think that would be low, and that makes me sad to say that.
Let's see if this side of the room gets a chance. Yeah.
Julia Bob Perkowitz, Eco America. Thank you for everything. And I've been watching MacArthur for a number of years, and this is an outsider's perspective, so it's always a little bit naive, but it's been fascinating watching the transition to you and the change in the foundation. And as I understand it, unlike many other foundations, you don't have a core charter that tells you have to invest here or here or here. You and the board get to decide that all the time. So when you came in, the going to the boldness, narrowing it down, the big bets, for me, that's all associated with you. You give credit to your board how much, how did that transition occur? Did the board decide they wanted big bets and they hired you to implement, or did you work that out?
Well, I am a member of the board, so. But there was an imperative from the board that they were concerned that we were diluting the aggregate of our investments by being in too many places. And so it was a moment in time when when the transition was from the prior president to me to say, can we actually act on that? And so it was a combination. It was a leadership combination with a board imperative. And I think the thing that was most distinctive about it was that I had been there already for 15 years, so I didn't have to go on a listening tour. And I didn't have to say, is this program good or is this not? As a matter of fact, the approach that we took to decide what were our big bets was not everything needed to compete amongst themselves, but we said, what do we want to do as an expression of living our mission of just, verdant, and peaceful? And then the sad consequence of that was that everything else needed to be then the subject of a responsible transition plan. And so there are 13 areas of work at MacArthur, some even that are where we had exercised leadership over decades, including one which was personally identified with me, which was housing across the country. Those things are all subject to the 2, 3, 4 year responsible exit plan. So really it was a serendipitous coming together of leadership willing to really tackle this and the board saying it's something we have to do.
So we have time for one more question. I'm not sure if we have a microphone, so I'm going to give you mine. Oh, there we are, right at the end here, this gentleman. And then we will we'll close.
Hi, my name is Fraser O'Leary, and I just retired as a public school teacher here in the district after 47 years. And so I haven't had that broad range of experience, but I've set up a foundation. I came to just listen to you talk about foundations, but it would be completely unsolicited, so I'm not going to talk about that. But if anybody here wants to donate to the foundation, you can see me after this. The question I have is, when we're talking about the wide range of philanthropy, we're not just talking about people on the left that are philanthropists. We're talking about people who have a lot of money on the right and in the middle. And I was wondering if there was any kind of conversation among philanthropists whose political philosophies or religious philosophies or whatever kind of philosophies they have, is there any kind of a meeting of the minds among those kinds of philanthropists?
So thank you for that question. As a matter of fact, when we ask the question, what will it take? Almost no problem can you identify what it will take, and it will only take the contribution of people who all think alike. An example is in criminal justice reform. We were the founding partners with the Koch Institute, with the Koch brothers, of an organization called the Coalition for Public Safety. And the fact is that there are many arenas where our values or our strategies are not the same, particularly in the climate area. But there was a very distinct overlap in criminal justice reform. Some folks on the left, including our partners, come at criminal justice reform with the notion that they want to tackle over-criminalization. And so we came at it from the aspect that we want to tackle over-incarceration. But some of the remedies are the same. And so I think that we need to make sure that all of us are open to fellow travelers on issues, even if there are other areas of endeavor or values that we don't agree with, because the problems that this country, this world is facing, they really require all hands on deck, and all the hands are not the same.
Another issue that attracted both right and left and everything in between was the marriage equality issue, and you saw the success of that effort. Would you all join me in thanking Julia Stasch?